By 9:20 that Thursday, an insurance auditor pulled CPSI logs on 6 sites tied to $431 million in active contracts, and my phone hadn't stopped ringing since 8:15. I was in the equipment yard, coffee on a fence rail, thumbing a brass key worn smooth on a frayed lanyard. Somewhere in a mortgage account sat $751,000, the balance left on the house my wife and I bought the year our twins were born. I let the phone ring. My name is Victor Mercer. I'm 52. I've spent 24 years designing and inspecting public playgrounds, the last 7 of them here at Alder Lane Recreation Group, the only certified playground safety inspector this region has had since the policy shift that made a CPSI sign-off mandatory before any site could open. Break that chain of custody, and our insurance carriers had made clear, in writing, that every open contract in the region went straight into review, locked out until a new inspector could be certified. Nobody at corporate had ever needed to think about who held that designated authority. It had just always been me. The key on that lanyard opened one thing: the steel log box bolted inside every regional office, where signed final safety certifications were filed the day a site cleared inspection. Insurance carriers had required that chain of custody for 6 years, ever since a competitor's uninspected surfacing sent a kid to the hospital in another state. I hadn't touched that box in 3 weeks. Nobody had asked me to. I hadn't caused what was happening in that lobby that morning, not with my own 2 hands. I'd simply kept doing my job the way I always had, reading every entrapment zone clearance myself, refusing to sign off on anything I hadn't personally walked, while somebody else quietly stopped routing the work through me at all. That distinction was about to matter to a great many people who currently had no idea it existed. The phone buzzed again against the fence rail. I looked at the screen. Orlando, then Orlando again, then a number from corporate I didn't recognize, and set it face down in the truck bed. Somewhere behind that string of calls sat 6 site supervisors who'd been filing installation reports straight to a team leader who'd never once climbed a ladder to check them himself. 24 years teaches you the sound loose hardware makes on a rotating spinner before a parent ever notices it. It teaches you which surfacing vendors cut their impact attenuating foam too thin, and which auditors actually pull the log box instead of taking a binder's word for it. I hadn't opened that log in weeks. I didn't need to. Every entry in it was mine, in ink, dated the day I wrote it. Somewhere across 6 states that morning, installation crews were standing around finished playgrounds nobody had legally cleared for public use, and a man who called my sign-off a bottleneck was about to learn what 7 years of documentation actually cost to fake. I finished the coffee. Still warm, for once. I didn't rush it. 24 years also teaches you that the worst mornings almost always start out looking exactly like the good ones. Nobody in that lobby yet understood what the auditor was really asking for. My phone rang again, then Orlando's somewhere across town, then a whole hallway full of people finding out, almost together, exactly what a missing signature was worth. 7 years ago, Andrew Pham handed me that brass key across a folding table in a half-finished regional office and said almost nothing about it. Andrew was senior regional operations advisor by then, quiet in a way that made people lean in instead of tune out. "You'll know when to use it," he told me. That was the whole training. I took it seriously anyway. Over those 7 years, I inspected more than 400 sites myself, checking entrapment zone clearances with a gauge before I'd trust a drawing, testing impact attenuating surfacing by hand instead of taking a vendor's spec sheet at face value. I didn't need a compliance dashboard to tell me a rotating spinner had loose hardware. After 24 years in this trade, I could hear it in the way the bearing hummed before a parent ever would. The log box sat bolted to the same wall for 7 years. Same key, same handwriting in the margins of every entry, going back to the week Andrew trained me. That was never an accident either. Andrew had built the whole habit into me on purpose. Alder Lane carried the heaviest liability exposure in the region, 6 states of public school and municipal contracts worth more than the rest of the company's book combined. Every completed installation required a signed final safety certification from a designated CPSI before it could be invoiced or opened. For 7 years, that signature was mine. Nobody at corporate had ever needed to think twice about who held that authority, the same way nobody thinks about a load-bearing beam until someone quietly saws through it. A few months before all this, a field coordinator named Olivia Chen caught me remeasuring a slide's exit zone by hand while the crew stood around waiting. I ran the gauge along the fall zone boundary twice, checked it against the ASTM F1487 clearance table I still carried folded in my back pocket, then knelt and pressed a palm flat against the surfacing to feel for a soft spot the dashboard hadn't flagged. There wasn't one that time. There had been, twice before, on sites nobody else had thought to double-check. "You know the app already cleared that," she said, not unkindly. I told her the app was usually right. Usually wasn't the same as always, and always was what a signed certification actually promised a school district. She laughed, said I was the last man in America who still trusted a tape measure over a tablet, and went back to loading the truck. I didn't mind being that man. Being that man was the whole job. What nobody in the new leadership had noticed yet was that my name had never been formally reassigned off a single one of those certifications. Not when Orlando took over the region. Not when the org chart quietly stopped listing me on project emails. Somebody would have had to file paperwork with the state board, recertify a second inspector, and update 6 states of insurance documentation. Nobody had. I hadn't reminded anyone. Reminding people wasn't part of the job description Andrew had handed me either. I finished training on that key 7 years ago and asked Andrew what happened if nobody ever needed it. He said a rule like that didn't wait around for anyone's permission to matter. It just kept doing its job, on schedule, whether the people above it noticed or not. What we'd built quietly kept every site in 6 states legally open for 7 more years after that conversation, right up until the morning somebody stopped checking whether it still mattered. Orlando Nardi showed up to his first site walk in a hard hat, so clean it still had the manufacturer's sticker half peeled on the brim. He never touched the surfacing. He stood at the edge of the fall zone in that hard hat and a branded vest that had never once seen mud, and he smiled at me like we hadn't already sat through an hour of introductions in the regional office. "Victor, good, you're out here." He said it the way you'd greet a subcontractor. I wanted us to align on the new rollout schedule in person. What schedule? 12 sites in 6 weeks. Leadership wants better optics on regional velocity. He held up a phone with a slide deck already open. Real-time crew tracking, real-time completion percentage. No more waiting on a paper log to tell corporate what already happened. The log tells them what's safe, I said. That's the part it's good at. With respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to move past. He smiled the smile of a man who'd never had to apologize for being wrong about something that mattered. Nobody's questioning your expertise, Victor. We just need better visibility. Who's certified to sign the final safety certification if I'm not on site? He didn't know. I watched him not know it. A half-second pause, eyes flicking to the phone like the slide deck might have an opinion on CPSI credentials. It didn't. "The system flags issues automatically now," he said instead. "We don't need a manual bottleneck slowing down 12 sites. That bottleneck has a name. It's in the vendor contract, and it's in 6 states of insurance paperwork. I've read the contract." "Then tell me what page names the sign-off authority." He didn't answer that directly. "Look, nobody's trying to erase what you built here. We're just streamlining how the region operates. That's all this is. Streamlining isn't the same as reassigning. Did the state board recertify a second inspector, or is somebody just assuming the tracker counts? The tracker is the system of record now. That's the whole point of the rollout." A compactor fired up 2 sites over. Neither of us looked at it. 24 years teaches you which sounds need your eyes. "You should climb the equipment before you decide what it needs," I said. "I don't need to climb it. I have the dashboard." The dashboard's usually right. Usually isn't always. Always is what a signed certification actually promises a school district. With respect, Victor, that's exactly the mindset we're moving past. I asked one more question, the only one that mattered standing at the edge of a fall zone I'd inspected longer than he'd worked in this industry. Was there a version of streamlining that didn't quietly remove the one signature standing between these sites and a very expensive mistake? He checked his phone instead of answering, thumbed past it like a notification he'd get to later. I don't know if anyone was still listening by then, but if a story like this is worth your time, staying with us is what keeps these stories coming. A new one every day. "Any other concerns?" he asked, already walking back toward his truck. "I'll let you know when you make a decision worth having one about." He laughed like I'd made a joke. I stayed at the fall zone, where the compactor was already telling me something his dashboard never would. He'd just spent an hour dismissing the one thing he was going to need most, and none of it was going to show up on any tracker until it was already gone. The regional call happened at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. Orlando dialing in from a conference room I hadn't been invited to sit in, the rest of us on video from trucks and job sites. That detail told me most of what I needed to know before anyone said a word. Team, exciting update, Orlando said, hard hat visible on the shelf behind him like a trophy. Starting this week, site completions route through the new tracker for sign-off. Streamlines everything. I didn't raise my voice. Define sign-off. Crew lead confirms scope complete. Tracker flags it green. We move to invoicing. Cuts about 2 days per site. That's the CPSI's job. It's in the contract. It's an efficiency play, Victor. We're saving roughly $981,000 a year in overtime and inspection scheduling across the region. Orlando said the number like he was handing out a bonus instead of explaining what it actually meant. I capped my pen. I'd like that in writing. Specifically, whether my final safety certification authority is being formally reassigned under this process or left open. It's a workflow change, not a personnel change. I don't think we need a memo for a workflow. I'm not asking about a workflow. I'm asking about a designation the state board has on file with our insurance carriers. It's a 10-minute call with legal. We can circle back on that. I'd like it documented that I asked, I said, and that today's answer is nobody knows. Nobody wrote anything down. It's not personal, Orlando added. We just can't let one signature slow down 12 sites. Somebody wrote that signature into the contract 7 years ago for a reason, I said. That's usually how contracts end up maturing. He moved on to the rollout calendar, which I already knew by heart, having built half of it myself the year before he arrived. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that the first 3 completed sites would host a joint ribbon cutting with the school district next Thursday. Press invited, the superintendent cutting the ribbon personally. I'm still the CPSI of record through however long this takes to sort out, I said. Any sign-off request comes to me directly. That's not rigid. That's the contract I've followed for 7 years. That seems a little inflexible for someone who built this region. I built it on inspections that held up. I'll keep inspecting it the same way. Those aren't the same thing as being inflexible. We need better optics on velocity this quarter, Victor. 12 sites, 6 weeks. That's the number leadership is watching. Then leadership should also be watching who's certified to put their name on the certification. That number matters more than the calendar does. Nobody's disputing your credentials. Then route the sign-offs to me. That's not a big ask. It's the job. Orlando didn't answer that one either. Orlando ended the call without asking if anyone had further questions. I sat in the truck a minute longer, engine off, the fence rail catching the morning sun through the windshield, the compactor from the site next door still humming faintly through the glass. That would have been bad enough on its own. But the ribbon cutting was already locked for Thursday morning at the flagship site, local press, and a superintendent and the district's full board of education on the calendar. And nobody on that call yet understood exactly what they were about to walk into, in front of all of them, blind. That Monday evening, I drove out to the regional office and unlocked the steel logbox with the brass key for the first time in 3 weeks. To the crew who walked past it every day, it was just a scuffed metal box bolted to a wall. To me, it was the only complete record of 7 years of final safety certifications that had never made it into Orlando's tracker. I photographed every page. Not to hide anything. I'd never touched a system I wasn't authorized to touch, and I wasn't about to start now. I photographed my own signed paperwork, on my own time, with my own phone, and saved the files to a drive that had never connected to the company network. That was the only active thing I did that entire evening. Documentation. Nothing else. The rule itself was simple, and the contract had been written that way on purpose 7 years ago. Every completed installation required a final safety certification signed by the region's designated CPSI before invoicing or public opening. A certification issued without that signature was invalid under the vendor agreement and voided the sites standing with our insurance carriers the moment anyone checked. I hadn't invented the automatic part. The carriers had. I'd simply made sure the contract said so in writing, with my name the only one authorized on that line. That authorization had never been formally reassigned. Not when Orlando took over the region. Not when the tracker quietly stopped routing anything through me at all. There was a second detail nobody outside that log box understood yet, and I wasn't going to explain it to anyone that night, including you. It mattered less what the rules said than when somebody finally checked it. The contract had one more feature, added at Andrew's insistence in year 2. Recertifying a second inspector after a gap required a minimum 30-hour emergency review through the state board, plus sign-off from an outside CPSI examiner. Nobody could just appoint a name and have it take effect by lunchtime. Andrew had built that clause after a competitor rushed an uncertified replacement onto a site and lost their entire regional contract inside a year. Speed kills people, eventually, he told me once. This just makes sure it doesn't kill the company first. I didn't call anyone that evening. I didn't warn Orlando, and I didn't warn corporate. Warning them wasn't my job anymore. They'd made that clear themselves, that morning, on a call I now had documented too. What I did instead was ordinary. I cross-referenced my photograph pages against the 12 rollout sites, checking which ones already had a valid certification on file and which didn't. 7 of the 12 were mine, signed months ago, clean, dated, and initialed the same way I'd initialed every certification since Andrew first handed me the key. 5 had gone up since the new tracker took over, including the flagship site hosting Thursday's ribbon cutting, the one with the district's Board of Education already confirmed on the guest list. I read that page twice, running a thumb along the same crease I'd folded into every field copy of the ASDM F1487 clearance table for 7 years. Then I locked the box and pocketed the key. Outside, a sprinkler system kicked on somewhere across the lot, ticking against gravel in the dark. Whenever somebody finally noticed the gap, the 30-hour clock on fixing it would start counting down on its own, and nobody in that leadership meeting had any idea it was even sitting there, loaded. Wednesday afternoon, Orlando held a photo op at the flagship site, a day ahead of the ribbon cutting, hard hat, and vest both spotless under the sun the way they always were. A local reporter stood by the new climbing structure while Orlando talked about reimagining regional delivery. I was there checking a different site's drainage 100 yards off, close enough to hear most of it. We used to lose 2 full days per site to manual sign-off, Orlando told the reporter, gesturing at the structure behind him like he'd built it himself. Now the tracker handles verification in real time. Same rigor, better optics, and everyone stays aligned in real time. Same rigor wasn't a phrase I'd have chosen. I kept walking the drainage line and let it go. 12 sites, 6 weeks, 0 delays, Orlando told the reporter. That's what happens when you modernize a process that's been stuck in the same paperwork for a decade. Olivia Chun was crouched at the base of the climbing structure with a measuring wheel, checking the fall zone against her tablet. She waved me over without looking up. This is reading 4 inches short on the exit clearance, she said. Not failing. Trending. Show me. She walked the wheel out again while I watched the number settle. 4 inches under the ASDM F1487 minimum, on a structure 2 days from opening to 200 kids. Flag it to Orlando, I said. I already did. He said the tracker cleared it Monday and the surfacing vendor signs off on their own installs now. She didn't look happy saying it. Not my call to stop the ribbon cutting. It isn't mine either. Not anymore. You could still say something. I already said something, in writing, on Monday's call. Nobody wanted it documented then either. So what happens Thursday? Whatever the contract says happens when a certification's missing. That's not up to either of us. That's a pretty cold way to put it. It's not cold. It's accurate. Cold would be pretending I didn't see the number on your tablet. I looked at the reading again. You logged the timestamp? Down to the second. Then you've done your job. So have I. Orlando wrapped up with the reporter and walked over, phone already out for a group photo. Victor, get in the shot. Regional team, full rollout. I'm on the clock at another site. 2 seconds. He held the phone up anyway. This is a good story for the region. Investors like seeing velocity. Velocity's not the number that clears a fall zone. It's 4 inches, Victor. Nobody's going to measure 4 inches. Somebody already did. I nodded at Olivia's tablet. He didn't look at it. Log it if it makes you both feel better, he said, already turning back toward the reporter. We opened Thursday regardless. Olivia logged it, time-stamped, and packed up the measuring wheel. Stopping the ribbon cutting wasn't her call to make, and it wasn't mine either. Not from outside a sign-off chain Orlando had already routed around us both. She glanced back at the climbing structure once before she left, the way you look at something you already suspect you'll be asked about later. By Thursday morning, replacing the authority he'd quietly bypassed would have taken a minimum of 30 hours through the state board, start to finish, under the very contract clause he'd never bothered to read. He had roughly that long before anyone official came looking. He spent almost all of it posing for photos instead. At 8:15 that Thursday, the insurance carrier's liability auditor showed up 2 hours before the ribbon cutting was supposed to start, unannounced, standard practice before any policy renewal on a contract this size. By 9:20 she'd pulled the logbox records on 6 sites and asked, politely, why 5 newer certifications weren't in the same handwriting as the rest. I was in my truck when Olivia called, close enough to 9:30 that I still had coffee left. She's asking who signed the flagship site, Olivia said. It's not in the box at all. It's not in the box because nobody sent it to me to sign. I told her that. She wants it in writing. Then it's easy. Write exactly what happened. By 10, the auditor had walked the flagship site herself and found the fall zone clearance Olivia had flagged Wednesday, still 4 inches short, still open, ribbon still tied to the posts for a ceremony 40 minutes out. This site was never certified, Olivia said, calling again. She's telling the superintendent's office directly. They're pulling the ceremony. That's her job. By 10:30, corporate legal was on the phone with the state licensing board, and the board confirmed what the contract had said for 7 years. 5 sites with no valid CPSI signature meant 5 sites operating outside insurance coverage, effective immediately. They're saying the whole regional book is under review, Olivia said. Not just the 5 sites. All 12. That's what happens when carriers can't verify a chain of custody. They don't take chances on which sites are actually fine. You knew this was coming. I documented it was coming. That's different from wanting it to. Orlando's telling people it's a paperwork technicality. Tell him a technicality doesn't freeze an entire regional insurance policy. A missing signature does. He's not going to want to hear that from me. He doesn't have to hear it from you. It's in the contract. It'll hear itself. I spent that stretch of the morning retorquing a swing set anchor bolt at a completed site, checking it against the spec sheet the way I'd trained every crew here to do, then wiping the wrench down and setting it back in the truck. Around 11, Olivia called with someone shouting in the background. We're losing about $28,000 an hour across the region. A voice I didn't recognize said. A figure built off the penalty clauses tied to our $430 million book of active contracts. That's before the district cancels anything formally. You hearing this? Olivia asked. I'm hearing it. Anything you want to say? Not today. By noon, Orlando called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. He's borrowing someone's phone, Olivia said, calling right after. His must be dead from all the calls. Wouldn't surprise me. Are you going to pick up next time? No. By 12:30, someone from corporate called directly for the first time in 3 years. I let that ring out too. I didn't call anyone back. I didn't offer a fix, and I didn't repeat a warning I'd already given twice. Once in writing, once at a photo op nobody wanted documented either time. I finished the last bolt and drove to my next site. By 1, Olivia called one last time. Someone finally pulled the contract clause up on a shared screen in the regional office, she said. They're reading it out loud, line by line now. Nobody's rushing through any of it anymore. Nothing in that region had broken. Every rule in that contract had simply done precisely what it was written to do 7 years ago, with nobody's permission required to keep doing it. The regional office called an emergency meeting for 6:15 that evening. Orlando, Andrew Pham, Olivia, and me, around the same conference table where the rollout had first been announced. Orlando's hard hat sat on the shelf behind him, still spotless. Nobody offered anyone coffee. Somewhere down the hall a printer kept spitting out pages nobody had come to collect, the only sound in the building besides our own voices. Victor, we need to understand what happened here, Orlando said. The 5 sites, walk us through it. There's nothing to walk through. 5 certifications were never sent to me. I can't sign what I never received. You knew the tracker had gone live. You could have flagged this earlier. I flagged it Monday, on this call, in this room. I asked for written confirmation of whether my sign-off authority was being reassigned. Nobody answered. Andrew tapped his pencil twice against the table. I have that request in writing, he said. Victor sent it to me as well, the same afternoon, for the file. He looked at Orlando, not unkindly. The way you'd look at a mistake you'd made yourself once. You didn't skip a formality. You skipped the one control this company built after the last time a site went unverified. With respect, Orlando said, one delayed signature shouldn't be able to freeze 9 figures of regional contracts. We aligned on this rollout to get better optics on the region, not worse ones. It's not one signature, I said. It's the only signature your own insurance carriers will accept. I didn't write that rule to be convenient. I wrote it to be correct. Orlando tried once more. Even if the process was wrong, the fall zone reading was 4 inches. That's within normal field tolerance on most sites. Not on this one. Not per the clearance table, and not per what your own coordinator measured twice and logged with a timestamp. She could have escalated it further. She escalated it to you, I said. You told her the tracker already cleared it. Orlando opened his mouth to answer that and didn't. I watched the color go out of his face, slow and complete, his hand going still on the phone he'd been holding all meeting, screen dark now. Nobody left to photograph. Andrew broke the silence. The state board will require a formally recertified inspector through the full review before any of the 5 sites reopens, he said, to the room, not to me. That's not a punishment. That's the process this contract has always required. And the district? Orlando asked. The superintendent postponed the ceremony this morning on the auditor's recommendation before any of us were in this room, Andrew said. That decision was already made without you. Nobody asked me anything else for a while. When Andrew asked me directly to confirm the logbox's dates were accurate and unaltered, I said yes, and that was the only thing I offered the rest of the evening. Olivia sat quiet through most of it, hands folded, until Andrew asked her to confirm the 4-inch reading and the time she'd flagged it to Orlando. She read the timestamp off her tablet without looking up, and Orlando didn't argue with a single digit of it. For what it's worth, Orlando said, near the end, I didn't think it would go this far. I believe you, I said. It still went this far. It had been sitting in a locked steel box this entire time. The one page in the whole regional office nobody had thought to read first, back when reading it might have still mattered. On Friday morning, the CEO flew in personally, which hadn't happened in this region since the ribbon cutting that actually went ahead 6 years ago. She sat across from me in the same conference room and told me the board wanted me to take over as regional team leader, effective immediately, full authority over sign-offs, staffing, and schedule. I said I appreciated it, and that I wasn't the right person for the job. She looked at me the way people usually look at someone turning down a corner office. Most people in your position would take this. Most people in my position spent 7 years wanting to keep doing inspections, not stop doing them to run meetings about them. You're the reason this didn't become a lawsuit, she said. I'm the reason it became visible instead of invisible. That's not the same skill as running a region. I told her the person for that was already in the building. Andrew Pham. He's been doing the actual work of holding this place together for longer than I've had this job. I'd trust him with the key before I'd trust myself. She didn't argue. Andrew didn't say much when she offered it to him either, just nodded once, the way he nodded at me 7 years ago handing over a brass key across a folding table. In place of the title, the CEO approved something I'd asked for instead. $8,050,000, funding a give-back program I'd pitch and lead myself, reduced cost and no-cost playground builds for districts that couldn't otherwise afford one. Not a consolation prize. The number she actually offered when I told her what I wanted more than a corner office. Orlando was reassigned within the month to a coordination role with a long title and no sign-off authority anywhere near it. His name came off the regional org chart the same week, and the framed photo from Wednesday's climbing structure photo op quietly disappeared from the lobby wall not long after. I heard he still keeps a hard hat in his car. I don't know what he uses it for now. I still have the key. It hangs on a hook by my back door these days, next to my truck keys, the lanyard frayed clean through on one side. I haven't needed to unlock that logbox in weeks. Andrew's building a new one, digital this time, with his own name on the one line that matters. And I let him, the same way someone once let me. The mortgage on the house is down to 11 years now, same as it would have been either way. My wife didn't ask about the promotion. She asked if I was going to be home more, now that I wasn't fighting a system that had already stopped listening to me. I told her yes. So far, that's been true. I ran into Orlando once, weeks later, at a supplier trade show neither of us expected the other to attend. He asked, quietly, what an actual fall zone reading was supposed to look like. I told him. He wrote it down. That wasn't revenge. Revenge would have required me to do something. All I ever did was keep signing my name to work I'd actually checked, and let a rule I didn't write myself, but chose to honor for 7 years, do exactly what it was built to do, whether anyone in that regional office believed in it or not.